fly fishermen paralyze themselves with all these super technical, complicated details. Small streams just taught me a lot. A bear had ripped the screen out of my camper shell, but the craziest bear story.
This is Southeastern Fly, and you're listening to the Angler's Influence podcast with our guest, Dan Munger. Dan, welcome to Influence.
Thank you, David. Excited to be here.
And welcome to the conference room, i.e. the studio, the mobile studio of Southeastern Fly. And so Dan is the owner of Fly Fishing Made Easy. His journey, his path to get there, he guided for 8 years. Is that right?
Roundabout, yep.
Okay.
Yep.
You worked in some fly shops?
I did, yep.
What'd you do in the fly shops?
So the first fly shop I worked for, I was just guiding, so I didn't work in that shop at all. And then transitioned to a lodge and resort that had a small fly shop on property here in East Tennessee. Was guiding out of that and teaching a lot of beginners, and then transitioned into a big fly shop, Little River Outfitters in Townsend. And then I helped manage that shop and directed the fly fishing school.
Oh, okay. All right. Fly Fishing Made Easy. Before we really delve into what we're going to talk about and your influences, tell us just a little bit about Fly Fishing Made Easy.
Sure. It's essentially a resource for people to learn how to fly fish. And I've noticed for sure that fly fishers tend to make things a little more complicated or more difficult sounding than they have to be. And I think it's just kind of the nature of a lot of fly fishers. And so it is a website and then an Instagram and a Facebook page. There is free content for people, but then on the back end, there's also an online course that I'm working to get launched. And that course will take people from not knowing anything, teaching them a really simple process to learn knots and casting and how to read water, how to buy the gear. And the result is they halfway know what they're talking about, enough to go to the water and do a little bit of suffering.
It is amazing how many people can cast really well. They can mend really well. They can fish really well. But when you say, "Hey, just tie this on," they look at me like, I don't even know how to do that. I don't even know how to tie a knot. Do you want me to tie, like I'm tying my shoe? What do you want me to do there? I mean, it truly is amazing how many people struggle in the knot area.
I think I really do, and just from the fly shops and teaching beginners a lot there, and even people that have been fishing a long time, I think that's probably the thing that people get the most frustrated with because of eyesight, and of course the tippet's small and clear a lot of times. But the thing is, you can get quick at tying knots if you just practice a little when you're not on the water.
And I tell people, just as you're watching TV,
yes.
You're watching the ball game. Go to a large box retailer or wherever and buy just the cheapest 20-pound test you can find.
Yes,
and just sit and tie knots with it. Just 5-10 minutes an evening for 2 or 3 weeks, and you'll be able to tie them in the dark.
For sure. It's automatic. It's crazy. And it doesn't, like you say, it doesn't take that much time.
No, it's just
a little bit of effort, and it's going to make it easier to change flies. It's going to make it easier if you get tangled to not get frustrated when you have to retie. Make it easier to change from fishing a dry to a nymph setup. It helps so much.
Yeah, and it's just muscle memories.
Totally.
All it is. Let's call it for what it is.
Yeah.
We would like to make it more complicated.
Totally.
Than that.
Yeah.
You're right.
Exactly.
We try to make things complicated,
Yep.
but it really will become muscle memory if they'll just got to get out there and do it.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk just a little bit about what's going on here. So for the first time listeners, let's we're going to go ahead and tell them what this concept is all about. So what we're doing is interviewing folks in the fly fishing industry, and we're not necessarily going to talk about the businesses that we're in or anything like that. What we're more interested in on influence is what were the influences that have shaped your path, and people, places, things, ideas that have shaped your path in fly fishing. Like I said, not necessarily our businesses, but just fishing in general, fly fishing in general. So everybody's got somebody, something like that kind of kicks them off and gets them started. So tell me about let's just get into your first influence. Who would that be, or what would that be?
That is definitely my grandfather. I call him Papaw. We all call him Papaw. And it started. We have a pretty big family. I have a lot of brothers and cousins and sisters. They're all, around our same age. Papaw and my grandmother lived on Smith Lake in North Alabama, but our house was 5 minutes from theirs.
Okay, so you were close to Grandma and Grandpa.
Yep, there every weekend. Sometimes during the week, the lake was right there.
So when was that? Back in the 80s, probably.
As early, yeah. I was born in '86, okay. So as early as I can remember, it was all of us there. I don't want to say before we could walk. That's a bit ridiculous, but I mean, my earliest memories are, my little sister holding a cane pole and a bobber and eating a sausage ball for breakfast, and us all at the boathouse trying to catch bluegill or whatever.
Dude, that could so be me. Cane pole and a sausage ball.
I love it. Yeah.
So what was Smith Lake back during the 80s?
It's tough. It's still tough. It's a really deep. It's probably the deepest lake in Alabama. I mean, there are places that are 300 feet deep on the lake, incredibly deep. It's a dammed up canyon, and so it's really tough. The spotted bass fishing. It's a really good spotted bass fishery. It can be because the water's so clear. And the nutrients are fairly low. I find this stuff out now after suffering through a lot of high school years, but it is stuff that's a really good striped bass fishery.
What kind of fishing did you do? I'm going to assume, I'm going to go out on a limb and think you probably didn't fly fish right off the bat, not at that age.
No, not at all. I was, there are not many, especially back then. There weren't many fly fishers in Alabama, and so Papaw doesn't fly fish really, and he Carolina rigged a lot. That's pretty much all he did. And so if there's anybody listening that doesn't know what that is, it's essentially a huge, 1 ounce weight. And then you have glass beads around that weight that clack and make noise. And then your soft plastic lure goes 3 or 4 feet behind it. So it enables you to get your fly or your lure down really deep and feel the bottom really well. And so I remember at a very early age, myself, my older brother, and then my cousin and his older brother we're all around the same age. All 4 of us in the boat with Papaw and hooks flying. And when Papaw could get a spare moment to fish, he was Carolina rigging. And it was fascinating even at an early age because he could tell us how deep the water was based off how long it took for the lure to sink, He could tell what the bottom was like. He would say, "Oh, there's a brush pile," or "Oh, there's a rock pile," or whatever. That's a mud bottom. Fascinating because it made the lake more than 2-dimensional.
Right.
It was amazing, and then he when he would get a strike with a Carolina rig, you have to kind of wait and let him take it, and so he would stand up, and you could tell he was getting a bite, and then. When he was convinced, it seemed like he would wait for 5 minutes to set the hook. I mean, I know it wasn't that long, but he'd wait and then he would wind down and just do a big hook set. And when you're, 6 years old and you've got a 200-pound grandfather in the front of the boat and he really lays into a fish, it's a pretty big event.
Kind of a hallelujah moment right there, isn't it?
Yeah. And his excitement level when any of us caught a fish, I mean, it's pretty miraculous that any of us caught fish.
I mean, let's face it, the dude's a saint.
He is.
4 kids in a boat.
Absolutely.
4 boys in a boat. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. And there were times where there were more. I mean, my cousins, we all line up gender and age. So, older brothers, and then me and my cousin, and then our younger sisters are 2 years younger than us. And then I have a younger brother that's 6 years younger than I am. So
wow, there
were times that it was, and I literally never got hooked nor remember any of us hooking each other. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but I don't remember it.
Did you ever catch a fish? Because my next question is, are you sure there was a hook on everybody's?
That's a really great question. Maybe there were times where there weren't. I do remember one fish it was very memorable. I didn't even catch it, and we were all in the boat. We were at this place called Raccoon Creek on Smith Lake, and that's not giving away a secret spot or anything. And
Okay.
all I remember is older brother hooking at the time it felt like a massive catfish. It was 4 pounds, 5 pounds. Like
It's a
nice
fish.
catfish.
Yeah.
At the time, I mean, it might as well have been 50 to me, and he caught it, and Papaw just could have been doing backflips. So he put that fish on a stringer, and we all kind of took turns holding the stringer, Took the fish back to the dock. The poor fish. I mean, a fish ended up, I think my cousin was playing with the fish on the stringer and ended up throwing the fish, and the stringer came off the post, and the fish swam off with the stringer,
Oh, no.
But there are still pictures of that fish. That was a very memorable fish. I was probably 5 or 6. If he made it through that, he could probably make it through anything. He's probably a pretty resilient fish nowadays, yeah.
Somebody's down there with another story going, yeah, I caught this catfish, and it had a stringer on
Yeah.
it. It looked like it was a 10-year-old stringer.
Yeah.
Instead of a 3 or 4 pound catfish, now it's a 5 or 6 pound, 7 pound
Yeah.
catfish.
Yeah.
So I think we all kind of have somebody that kind of kicks us along down the path, And it sounds like your papa was one. My grandfathers, both of them fished, so I was kind of in that same. I'm kind of in that same boat a little bit. So when did you start fly fishing?
So the first experience I had with it was we used to come up to Gatlinburg to camp as a family on occasion, and we'd stay in a little small cabin or whatever. And so I saved up some money. I used to see guys fly fishing in the Smokies, and it always looked super intriguing. So I bought a cheap rod and reel combo at the Smoky Mountain Angler in Gatlinburg, and I was probably 14. Best I can tell. I know I wasn't old enough to drive, so I think I was 14-ish. My older brother and he already had a really cheap combo, and so we spent those few days casting in a creek, and had no clue what we were doing. I mean, I was eating up with bass fishing. I had Bassmaster magazine subscriptions or whatever. I was obsessed with it. No clue what to do in a small creek. And so we ended up catching some little war paint shiners, tiny, tiny little shiners. And I thought they were trout. I didn't know what they were, but that was the first experience with it.
Obviously, they're trout because you can only catch trout on fly rod, right? Can't catch anything else.
Oh yeah,
right.
Yeah.
That's what we think when we first start out.
Yeah.
Going trout fishing. I'm going fly fishing, so I've got to be trout fishing, right? And that's not necessarily always the case.
Yeah, and if I would have known that, in Alabama, Alabama's an awesome place as a fly fisher. You've got so many, most of the bass fishermen stick to the big lakes. So if there's small creeks and rivers all over. So if you've got a fly rod and you want to go catch bass or, white bass, stripers, carp, my gosh,
Carp, yeah.
Sheesh,
when I think of a small stream in Alabama or a small river in Alabama, I think of like a bluegill, some smallmouth, and big snakes. That's what I think.
That's
about.
pretty accurate. Yeah. Cotton. That's one thing I love about East Tennessee is I don't have to worry about cottonmouths.
Right. Yeah, it's just the copperheads and rattlesnakes and such. But
yeah,
now you've been exposed, if
Yeah.
you will, to fishing, and then you're exposing yourself to fly fishing,
Yeah.
trying to get yourself underway doing that. What's your next step there?
Yeah. So after that, it went. I did late high school years. I did start catching bluegill out of a small creek close to the house we grew up in.
Perfect practice, right?
Perfect, because you get a lot of strikes. If bluegill were 4 pounds, average 4 pounds, I wouldn't fish for anything.
I wouldn't
else,
either. I never would go for trout.
No way. So
straight up bluegill all day long.
No question. And so then my freshman year of college, my older brother and I both went to the University of North Alabama. At least I went there. I started there. I finished at Auburn, War Eagle. Ooh, it's a bad time to say War Eagle in the state of Tennessee right now. But
in 2035, they could be on top. Who
yeah,
knows?
that's a good point. So at that school there was a smallmouth creek, perfect wadeable, beautiful smallmouth creek, and I really doubled down. And at the time I was fishing fishing bass tournaments out of a club there in North Alabama, and I showed up. I remember this very well. I showed up at the boat ramp. It was probably December. It was cold, drizzly winter morning. Saturday morning, boat ramp to put the boat in for the tournament, and I sat in line for 45 minutes to put the boat in, and it was sub-freezing outside. And so I put the boat in, went fishing. I went to, and actually I was fishing as a non-boater. So I was with another guy, I was a non-boater. I didn't have a boat. I had a small, tiny John boat. And so we went to our first 3 or 4 spots, and each spot had at least 4 boats on each spot. And I thought, man, I'm done with this. What am I doing? I don't do this to sniff gas fumes and have a crowded lake. There's water everywhere. So I kind of made a conscious decision. I'm going to focus more on fly fishing. So my brother and I would go wade fish this creek for smallmouth and catch really nice smallmouth out of this little creek, and it was addicting. Then after my sophomore year of college, I got a job in Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado, and it all, I guess the rest is history, as they say.
Next time you're spending all your time and half your money on fly fishing.
That's it. That's pretty much what happened, yeah.
So now you've graduated into fishing in the park, and we're going to talk about that a little later, I hope.
Yes.
I sure hope so anyway, because it's a great place to be.
We will.
But tell us about another influence that you have that might have took you down further down the path.
Sure, and it kind of correlates with that transition and getting the job in Rocky. And I don't remember exactly when I got this book. It was sometime between my freshman year of college and my sophomore year, best I can remember. Maybe a little later, but it's called a book called Instinctive Fly Fishing. And I do, quote, read a lot of books now, but most of them are audiobooks because I'm the type where if I sit still and try to read a book, I usually get distracted.
Right.
This book, though, it's written by a guy named Taylor Strait. He's a longtime guide in New Mexico. And the book is kind of based around the premise that fly fishermen paralyze themselves with all these super technical, complicated details, and it should be that you just kind of build some skills and then go to the water and fish like a hunter, like a predator almost,
Right.
And the book is really full of really, really practical tips. The way that he lays it out is just really, really just made sense to me. And so I read that book over and over. There's a section in there about you would probably find this interesting. There's a section about what to say and how to approach a guided trip as a client. There's also a section about how to approach a guided trip as a guide.
I probably need to read that.
Yeah. But the book is amazing. It's hard to kind of explain how awesome the book is, but I know for sure there's a sentence in that book that says something to the effect of fly fishermen would rather choose convoluted solutions over simple ones. And the book is kind of out to, and it's based off 30, 40, who knows how many years as a fisherman, but a lot of other experience guiding clients. He says he started wanting to write the book, so he would, he took a tape recorder out to the water and he would record the things that he thought of. And then he says that it started sounding like all the other stuff he was trying to be different than, So then he kind of switched and said he really started paying attention to what his anglers, what his guide clients, what questions they had, and what were the practical, maybe not so sexy things that made a big difference. And that's kind of what the book is situated around. So that book was very influential. I read it multiple times. I actually picked it up after I talked to you, a few weeks back, and went back and reread it. And I'm going to get it for quite a few of my buddies that have been fly fishing for a long time because it's just really, really good.
So as we get it, this is so fly fishing. Right? What you're saying. We get into fly fishing. It looks complex, so we think it has to be complex. A friend of mine very often says, complexity without necessity. That's kind of his saying. Whenever you try to think of some new, off the wall, convoluted idea, and he's like, complexity without necessity. And okay, bring me back to the basics, because that's what really, in the end, is probably going to catch more fish than anything. Is consistently doing the right things.
Yeah. There's a lot to that, and I don't exactly know what it is that makes us choose convoluted solutions. I think it's partly that, there's a whole facet to this that we don't really see, with the weather changing and the fish turning on and turning off. And So you do something that's kind of off the wall. You change your parachute atoms to parachute atoms with red thread instead of black thread, and then the fish turn on, and you think, oh, that red thread makes all the difference, right?
Right.
So there's that whole realm of that sometimes you can't explain why it happens, but you got to find, everybody wants to find the reason that it happened. So I don't know. It's interesting for sure.
I think we try to think the fish are smarter than they are.
Yeah, agreed.
And it's probably mostly instinct and survival for them.
Yeah.
And we're just trying to fit in there somewhere. And
yeah.
Like you said, that parachute atoms with the red thread, man, that's the ticket. And you should have been here on Wednesday to fish it.
Yeah. 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 I think with trout too, I think something I've thought about is, a lot of people, of course you have to get a good drift with trout, and man, you know how picky they can be with a drift.
Oh, yeah.
But it's not that they're sitting there going, oh, Daniel's on the other end of that line and yada, yada. It's that dude sits in that spot for hours if he's undisturbed. And it's, he just kind of it seems like he just has a picture of what it's supposed to look like. It's like if that cup of coffee right there hovered off the table. You drink coffee all the time, right? It's not supposed to, you don't know why.
Right.
It just happens.
Yeah.
And you're like, that's weird.
Yeah.
And so there's not much thought process. It's just different.
Right.
And of course they're scared of everything, right?
They are. They are. Yeah. It's interesting because I'll tell people, work on your drift. I don't know how many times I say mend per trip, hundreds probably, until they get it in their mind, like 3 hours in of a 4-hour trip, they're starting to mend without me saying something. And it's all about presentation, that you got to present the fly just right. And what I think they do, there's no science behind this, so don't go off and say, well, David Perry said, because there's no science, right? But what I see is the fish sitting there watching everything that comes down the river and just basically taste testing it. If he's hungry, he's going to taste test it. Or if it's hungry, it's going to taste test it. If your fly kind of looks like everything else and they just happen to be taste testing that day, they're probably going to test your fly.
Yeah.
But if it's, I like to say if we want a dead drift in certain areas, and if your fly's going through the water like a water skier, it probably isn't going to get hit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
agreed. Yeah.
It's really there's some technical things that do work.
Yes.
But overall, I don't think it doesn't have to be complicated.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I think that it's hard to pinpoint, but getting a good drift is maybe the most important skill, I might say. You give somebody can cast well. You give them, as far as the best fly for that day. You tie their leader up the right way. You do everything, even if they don't spook the fish. If you don't get that good drift, doesn't matter what fly it is. A lot of times,
Yep. I have cut a fly off of one angler's tippet and put it on the other because the other guy wouldn't shut up about he had the wrong fly, and just swapped the flies. That's all I did, and said, all right, go back to fishing. And the guy that was catching fish continued to catch fish, and the guy that wasn't catching fish continued not to catch fish.
Yep.
So presentation really is it. So you're in Rocky Mountain National Park,
mm-hmm.
and what are you doing in the park? Let's talk about that.
I worked for the Park Service, so I got a job. The first summer I was out there, I got a job restoring rock walls that the CCC had built. It's definitely a young man's job.
Boy, that is.
Yeah, but it was super interesting because we would kind of a little bit of a history nerd, and so it's a whole crew that restores those rock walls. Literally jackhammers them apart, numbers them, draws schematic diagrams of them, and then busts up the footer, rebuilds the footer, and then puts the rock wall back the same way it was built, by the CCC. So that was my job the first summer out there, and then I started working for the trail crew after that.
So the only rock wall I can think about in the park, there's two. There's one on the Granby side.
And I was on the Estes Park side.
Were you?
Mm-hmm.
So Rainbow Curve, there's a huge rock wall there with 10,000 chipmunks.
That rock wall is the one. I rebuilt that rock wall.
Did you really?
That would have been in 2008 maybe. Summer of 2008. I could be off by a year. But
everybody stops there.
Everybody.
Yeah.
And so imagine working in that parking lot. I mean, I told the story about what we were doing, seem like thousands of times. But you close off part of the parking lot, big. And then, on the other side of that rock wall, it's a pretty steep drop off.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So, we're hopping around like billy goats down there. Yeah, amazing. The guy that heads up that rock wall crew is a really sharp, bright guy. And he's passionate about, the history and stuff. And it's interesting how, he's rebuilt a bunch of the walls along Trail Ridge Road there.
So do you think the park influenced your fishing at all?
It's definitely my next influence.
Is it really?
It is, no question. Because all told, I spent 4 seasons out there, and some during college, some after college, and so I lived in park housing all 4 years, but the second and third year I lived and had I was super fortunate. Sometimes I can't believe it, but I had a trout stream in my front yard for those 2 years. Cheap little cabin, and that was a game changer, because up until that point, anytime I got to go trout fishing, I felt like it was, I dreamed about it all the time, and then it was a privilege when I got to go to a trout stream. And then you kind of start feeling rushed, and maybe you're not able to sit and take everything in the way you want to. But out there, it was like I crammed years of that type of fishing into, a couple of summers. I could get off work and look down and see trout rising. And so I pretty much got to spend every day on the water, which was a big teacher for me, for sure.
So could you see the trout stream from wherever your cabin was?
For sure, yeah. I could see it from, literally I could pull my truck up, get out the truck, and look down and see part of the stream. Yeah.
So if a fish is feeding and you could see it, you just tie on a whatever, and walk down there and fish for. You could probably, if you lived right there, you could fish for one fish.
Oh, for sure.
There's these cabins up there. So I don't know. It's been 4 or 5 years ago. Me and a friend of mine were out there. We had like 4 or 5 hours maybe max to spend up in the park. We had some other stuff going on, and I talked him into going up into Rocky Mountain National Park through Estes Park. We were on that side, and so I'd looked at the map and I said, all right, here's this trout stream that's running through this big old meadow. And so we pull up in this little dirt parking lot, and I get out, parked right beside if I remember this, it's been a little while, but if I remember it right, there were some mailboxes there. It's just like you would see in an apartment, maybe in Brooklyn or somewhere, just all of them right there. So we parked right beside that, and this stream was literally it was called Moraine Park. It was through this meadow, and it was just like twist and back and forth and back. And we fished. I didn't catch anything, but anyway, so.
That's I said I'm about to make you mad, because that's the meadow that I was able to live in.
Really?
Cabins. There are some private cabins on the south side of that meadow. They're private, and then there's some cabins that are Park Service cabins, and that was the meadow.
So if I'm
Moraine Park,
they're right up the hill there from these mailboxes that I'm talking about, aren't they?
Yeah, you keep going up that gravel road through the gate.
Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah,
amazing. It's the prettiest meadow. If you think about Rocky Mountain trout stream going through a meadow, that is the image that pops in your head. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's why I wanted to go there.
Yeah.
On the other side, the Granby side, you've got the Colorado coming out and running down that valley, but on the Estes Park side, yeah. So you lived in these cabins.
I lived in those for 2 summers. Yeah,
2 summers. So that had to have influenced you.
It was amazing. It was just like I say. It was like cramming years and years of fishing and time on the water into, 3 to 6 months at a time.
Wow.
Yeah, it was amazing. And the whole experience too with wildlife and really learning. Like you say, you could fish for one fish. There were certainly fish that you recognize. There are fish that there was one spot, there was a fish, I never caught him. I called him the shark. He was massive brown trout, and he was up under an undercut. You rarely ever could see him. Every once in a while he'd slide out. Like I said, I never caught him. And fishing those small streams is really was really helpful for me, because it almost simplifies it in some ways, because you don't have to decide, in a stream that's 100 feet wide. You don't have all those decisions to make on a small stream. Don't spook the fish. You can see where they are. You can see where they like to hang out. So the small streams were a really, really big teacher. Maybe that's why I like living, near the Smokies now, because small streams just taught me a lot.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah, very influential.
100 yards of a small stream could have every single type, especially up there.
Yeah.
Every type of water in it. Just 100 yards or 200 yards of stream could have everything that you could ever want to fish.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I noticed even I started my later years out there. I started guiding in my off time for a fly shop out there, and I even noticed that there was a section of a river that I liked to fish, and it was a really popular river in Rocky Mountain. There was one section that had these big, I don't know if you saw these big elk exclosure fences that run alongside the road.
I did.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so these elk exclosure fences, there was one, and you had the gravel road, and then to the left of the gravel road, you had an elk exclosure, which is a fence that's probably, 10 feet tall or so. And then the river was on the other side of that elk exclosure. Well, humans are perfectly permitted to go into those exclosures. It's just to protect the willows, right? Well, the river, it was probably not even a half-mile section that was on the other side of that elk exclosure.
Yep.
Well, that one section fished exponentially better than the other sections because people just didn't really fish that section much because they thought they weren't allowed in there.
That's what we went in there and fished.
Yeah.
We went in there so this friend of mine that went with me could take a picture of somebody fly fishing. That was the whole deal behind us running up there.
Yeah.
Amazing. You go up there for 4 hours just to get that one perfect picture that he wanted so bad. But so a couple things I remember there. One, there were probably 100 elk in there.
Yeah.
Two, this dude comes riding up. So I'm getting waders on. This dude comes riding up on a horse. He gets off. He opens the gate. He comes out. He is just a typical Western cowboy-looking dude. So my friend snapped a picture of him, him and his horse, and we I think he might have talked to him. I was still putting my waders on, but anyway, he snapped a picture of him, and they went on his way. And my friend, that was really the picture that came out. That was the best picture of this dude just ride up on his horse, and he got off, and he was standing beside his horse whenever my friend took the picture, and so he took it to his work and was showing his friends, and every lady that saw that picture was just like, wow, we need to go out to Rocky Mountain National Park. I don't know who this guy is, but anyway, we named him Dylan. We don't know who he is, but it's
a perfect Colorado cowboy name.
Oh yeah. And one lady was like, yeah, I need to get a one of those pictures, and she had it put on a mat.
No.
And it's hanging in her office at her house. No kidding.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So that was he went out there to get some picture of some guy fly fishing, which would have been me, and he came back with a picture of a real Western cowboy in Rocky Mountain. But you could see the peaks behind it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the perfect setting out there for fly fishing.
Yeah.
It really is. And I could see where that would really influence you. And living out there. So you said you guided for a little while out there?
I did, yeah. So I started, there was a fly shop that I would go in, and it wasn't the biggest fly shop in Estes Park, but the guys in there, they were just straight fish heads. The other shop was real popular along the main drag and pushing a lot of trips this other place. These dudes were just fishermen, And the owner, Grant, he grew up partly in Scotland and partly in Australia, but I'd go in there not knowing anything. He'd let me pick his brain while he was doing other stuff. And I'd stroll around looking for the flies. I'd pick up a fly, ask him a question about it. And he was just I wouldn't say he was super friendly to everybody, but for some reason I would ask questions and he would answer them. And there was a head guide in there named Mike Oatley, which he was awesome too. So anyway, after spending some time in there, I was working 410s for the Park Service, so I had 3-day weekends. And I was just completely eaten up with it by now, And so I went in there and I said, do you ever need any help guiding? And he said, have you ever guided before? And I said, no, I haven't. And he said, good. And he said something to the effect of, I know you're a fish head and you don't stink as far as I know. and you seem nice enough, so let's see what we can do with you. And so that's how it started.
So a nice, clean-smelling, possibly guy, and we're going to make a guide out of him.
I guess that checks all the boxes,
I
at
guess
least
so.
to start with. And so anyway, I was on the bottom of the totem pole, of course. I was the new kid. I was 22. And so he pretty much told me, if you want to start guiding on those off days, just kind of be ready for me to call you the night before. And, if you want to take the trips, then I'll give them to you. So I made up my mind that I did not want to get out there and not know what was going on. If people were paying me to take them fishing, I want to know what was going on. So the way I treated those weekends was I would wait, and if he called me and offered me a trip, I took it. And a lot of times, it was trips that maybe the other guys didn't necessarily want. Maybe it was kids, or it was almost always people that had never fly fished before. And so if he didn't call me for a trip, I would spend the day trying to find, and actually in Instinctive Fly Fishing, he talks about this, trying to find a section or river that was my favorite section for guiding a left-handed person, or my favorite section for guiding somebody that couldn't walk or get around very well. And so that's kind of how I almost treated those weekends, even though I wasn't guiding or getting paid for them. Instead of just going out to fish, I tried to treat them, because you get used to a section and it becomes kind of automatic to you.
Absolutely.
So I tried to kind of, and the first few trips were eye-opening. We talked about knots earlier. I remember the first time somebody, I tied up their whole setup. Let's go fishing. They cast and of course get hung up pretty quick, break the fly off or got tangled or something, and I had to retie the leader. And that's the first time I ever thought, I have got to get quicker at tipping onto my leader, because this guy's staring at me and he's paid money and I'm fumbling around,
Yeah, I've got an audience.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, everything's changed.
Yeah, for sure. So that's all kind of included in why Rocky Mountain was influential, because it was awesome fishing, loved doing it on my off time, and then when I started guiding, that forced me to do things I wouldn't have done if I was just fishing for myself.
That's a great place out there, because you've got 450 miles of rivers and probably 150 or over 150 lakes, and so you really kind of got a smorgasbord of opportunity out there.
Oh yeah,
to take people, and you can get away, from everybody up there. I mean, you can get into some places where there's not going to be another fisherman
for sure
forever, or feel like forever. So if you're living in these cabins, which I think is hilarious, because I didn't know you then at all when I was out there a few years ago.
Yeah.
So all right, so I'm gonna so those are influences, but I want to know more about the cabin thing too.
Yeah, let's go.
So all that wildlife is there, and there's a lot of wildlife there. If you've never been there, you really do need to go. And we went in May. Yeah, we went in May.
And so the elk were still in the meadow.
Yeah. So I can imagine waking up in the morning and opening the door, and there's a bunch of elk, kind of wandering around a trout stream.
Yep.
So, what about the wildlife out there?
Yeah. So the elk were constant. I mean, they do go up higher, depending on the year. It's when it starts to dry out and get warmer. So I guess it's usually July that they start disappearing a little bit. You still see some, but the herd moves up. But there was one morning I woke up, or it was the middle of the night. It was probably 3:00 in the morning, and our place was a one level, just cabin, and pretty much one room. And so I woke up, I had left my work boots, my stinky work boots outside, and I woke up and heard something. I turned around and opened the blinds, and there was a cow elk. Her nose was pressed up against the glass, and she had my boot in her mouth. So I kind of, rubbed my eyes like, what am I looking at? And then banged on the glass, and she dropped it. So stuff like that was happening a lot. I did try to grow a garden one year with a fence around it, a little small, almost like a container garden. And it's hard to grow a garden out there anyway when you're used to growing up in Alabama, where you can throw seeds in the ground and they just grow.
Right.
It ain't like that out there. The elk finally got a hold of it. Bears in the meadow.
Okay.
So I woke up one morning, and a bear had ripped I have a camper shell on my Tacoma. Actually, I still have the same Tacoma. a bear had ripped the screen out of my camper shell. But the craziest bear story is the girls that lived next to me worked for the trail crew as well. And they were working in the backcountry all summer. So they would do, I think at the time they would do 8 days on in the backcountry, 6 days off, And so I walked out one morning, had my coffee in my hand, and I looked, their house was, let's say 50 yards away from my place. And the screen to one of the windows in the house was ripped down. I could see it from that far away. So I wandered over there with my coffee, and on the outside of the house, there was mud. The screen was ripped. There was black fur in the screen.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. I peek in the window, and there is like a Little Debbie snack cake. There's some kind of little cookie wrapper on the ground that doesn't have said cookie in it anymore. So I go, oh my gosh. I walk around to the front of the house. I open the front door, and the kitchen, that when you walked in the door, you're in the kitchen, completely ransacked. The refrigerator door was open. There was milk all over the floor. There was a tub of, butter that had a bear snout in it, had been licked out. So a bear had broken in, completely ransacked their kitchen, and then, walked out the same window.
That is crazy.
It was crazy. And then of course the thought comes in your head, is he still in here? Is he asleep in her bed?
Yeah, right.
So they actually had an axe there in the house, and you don't expect most girls to have an axe, but they're Colorado Trail Crew girls, So they had an axe. I grabbed the axe, walked through the house, bear was gone, and yeah, it was wild. That's probably the craziest bear story from living in the meadow.
Well, I hate to sound this way, but better their house than yours.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
that's definitely true.
That's crazy, because just the fact that you were able to live. I remember looking at those cabins and telling my buddy, man, it'd be cool just to stay there, for a while, and then here you are.
Yeah,
that's pretty interesting.
Crazy. And what's cool? Those private cabins, those were, and honestly, right after I moved, so that it became a park in 1915, I'm pretty sure.
Mm-hmm.
Those private cabins were there before it became a park.
Oh, okay.
But I think I could be saying this wrong, but when I left Rocky, it was 2011, late 2011. But when I left, everybody was saying that those contracts were up in 2015. They were 100-year easements or contracts or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I just thought, how terrible would that be if you grew up, if you were my age and that was Grandpa's house, and then it gets taken from you. It just seemed like it was a tough situation. So I don't know if that actually happened. I don't know if it got tied up in courts. I don't know, but those were private cabins.
Wow, and that's a long way back in the early 1900s.
Yeah.
It's a long way from anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like my Estes Park was they probably didn't even have a taffy shop in Estes Park at that time.
Oh, probably not. Yeah. And now there are multiple.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Dan, I sure appreciate you talking with us today. So just kind of a quick recap. Your papa really kind of kicked you off and got you started you down the path, and then you went to Gatlinburg and bought you a fly rod and started fly fishing. Then you read a book, got a little better, and wound up in Rocky Mountain National Park building walls, stone walls, and then ended up in a fly shop, started guiding for them, and I can just see how this path keeps going and going and going and going. But one thing that you said early on about your papaw was, you said that the lake was really, really deep, made in a canyon, but then you followed that up with the Carolina rig with the heavy weight, and I was just like, okay, Papaw really knew what Papaw was doing, because if you're going to fish down in a super deep lake, you're going to need some pretty heavy lead.
Yeah, and he had buddies that would fish tournaments. Papaw was never really super into fishing any tournaments, but I remember being 8 or 9 years old and sitting around, us all spending the night at Papaw's, me and my 8-year-old cousin and 10-year-old brothers, and then the younger ones too. But Papaw would say, I went and talked to this one tournament guy who used to win all these tournaments. He told me exactly how to fish the Carolina rig, and this is how we're going to do it. And he was talking about tactics even at an early age. So he's still eating up with it. He's still eating up with it. He loves it.
Well, I hope he gets a chance to listen to this, or at least you can tell him about it.
Oh, he's going to listen to it for sure.
But I appreciate you coming by.
It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening to Southeastern Fly, the Angler's Influence. I'm David Perry, and we've been talking with Dan Munger, the owner of Fly Fishing Made Easy. You can find that at flyfishingmadeeasy.com. And hope to see you next week. Thanks.